Well, thank you so much, Dr. Racines, for coming, speaking with us about the qualitative chapter you wrote. Do you mind giving us a little overview of what you're doing now?
Sure. So, no, thank you for having me. It's certainly been a pleasure to be able to contribute to this book, which I think is very much needed. So currently, I think I do a couple of different things. I'm a principal by day, professor by night. So I like to say I'm a principal of an ETK through 8 in Los Angeles, and I am also a professor at the University of Southern California, where I run an international Matisa program for students around the world.
Awesome. That sounds super exciting. So you're still entrenched in the day-to-day activities, which I'm sure helps with from a research perspective.
Absolutely, and it's kind of why I choose to do both, which sounds a little crazy, I think, sometimes to most folks, but it definitely just keeps me grounded in the practicality of the research.
Yeah, so actually, I'm going to skip around a little bit. This kind of segues into one of the questions. How do you stay up to date on the current research as a researcher?
I have a ton of feeds that come straight to my inbox, which for me is probably the easiest way for me to stay up to date. A handful of journals that I have at my availability, my T-Cell Quarterly, my Ed Week, anything I can get my hands on. I'm born and bred in Washington, D.C., so I live on CNN pretty much most of the time as well. And I try to get my hands on as much policy that's going through the door that affects my day-to-day as a principal. And also what I'm currently dealing with as a principal is really what I'm always thinking is the next best researchable question, because there's just so much going on right now in my day-to-day that I'm just trying to keep up really with the need.
Are there any key researchers that you try to follow in your field?
Yeah, I try to stay on top of, I'd say probably like key pockets of research.
Okay.
Probably the best piece of advice that I got when I was, finishing up my dissertation was to think of my research in 3 little Venn diagrams, and that's kind of where I keep my nose on the ground, for so to say. But teacher education, litigation trends, and instructional coaching. That's definitely the world that I kind of stay in, and all with regards to English learners. So,
Awesome.
yeah.
Okay, and then I'll ask another question. How did you settle upon your topics for research? Like, how did you find that niche in your Venn diagram?
My background is in criminology. It was one of those that never meant to become a teacher, and just here I am. So my background actually was to do something more proactive than reactive in the criminal justice field, and it's kind of how I fell into teaching. So that's kind of how I think that's my own personal bias. My lens that I have in this field is always trying to give a voice to the voiceless, those marginalized pockets of students that we have around the world, really, and understand their experiences better through both public and private education, and just trying to improve the field by a millimeter at a time. So.
Given that you're kind of interested in your role as a principal, but then also communicating with policy and legislation, do you find that you have to translate research findings differently depending on the audience you're speaking to?
Yes, I've definitely learned that what interests me the most when I get really excited about a topic and share it with my teachers, are looking at me like, yeah, but I'm just trying to plan my lesson for today. So I try not to get too lost in the policy that I'm super intrigued with, or if I'm following a specific litigation trend out here in California, I definitely have to think about the practicality of that, and how am I going to share that to make it something that's tangible for a classroom teacher, so that we can improve our practices, but it's also a much larger vision for me in terms of policy. So I have to make it practical if I want to see that change on the ground.
Okay, and then actually this kind of segues nicely into the last question. Can you give an example where the results of a research study basically led you to asking a new research question?
Yeah, I think my dissertation chair probably gave me that best piece of advice, right? To be always thinking of the study of like the next best researchable question. So I conducted a study of, I wanted to look at again, I'm always looking at the marginalized population. So I looked at English learners' experiences, and I wanted to look at the flip of that, which was in populations where there were low English learners, a very low population. And I looked in a neighborhood in McLean, Virginia, right outside of Northern Virginia. And that actually led me to my larger studies, which were litigation trends. So very untraditional legal research in terms of qualitative research, but it's doable. So I definitely say if that's your passion, follow it and make it work.
Awesome. So I'm actually going to ask one more question. Do you have any advice for researchers that are beginning to get involved into qualitative research?
Yes, I'd say, I'd say really understand, what it is that you're looking for, what answers are you looking for, and what are you looking to improve in the field. I think one of the lessons that I learned when I was just starting was I'm not going to solve the problems of the world with just one study, and to kind of be okay with that. But everything moves the field by a tiny little millimeter, and that is the change. That is, every little study that you do improves the field by a tiny little piece. And that's where you really learn about other researchers in your field, and you learn who's passionate about what you're passionate about. And you put those voices together to try to make a difference. And I think that's what we try to do in this book as well, is put our different lenses together to meet the best needs of students that need the most. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.